Diego, thank you so much for making time in your beautifully purpose-driven days to stop and do this show.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to talk.
Me too. I want to just dive in and find out a little bit about your journey because you have such an incredible way of really putting words to the human experience that I think we can all really identify and feel as though when we hear you speak and when we read what you write, we feel seen. And in order for you to do that, there must have been a soul journey that you went on to sort of go through that portal to really coming and dropping into truth. And I want to hear, like, how did you find yourself in that self-discovery journey?
Well, it took a while, because it was like a pretty step-by-step process where first I had to realize that I had all these really knotted up patterns inside of my mind that were just really making me behave in ways that were unhealthy towards my mind, unhealthy towards my body. And I think my life could have ended pretty early if I hadn't
Mm.
dealt with what was happening inside me. I had developed really nasty habits with drugs, was partying way too much, and I kind of just came to a pretty big crash in the summer of 2011. And it kind of started all from there, where I recognized, like, okay, I need to change the way I'm living my life, or else this will all end terribly wrong. Um, I think
Wow.
from there, I kind of just started building new habits, not doing serious drugs, and then just over time, I started feeling better. But the big change came when a friend of mine told me about Vipassana meditation. And I did my first course, and that was like the real kind of opener to the fact that, there was more inside of me than what I thought. And also, I started feeling this like new growing aspiration to write. But it took a few years for me to realize, like, I should really put time into writing. And but what really kicked it all off was just focusing on my healing.
Hmm. Thank you for being so vulnerable. And I know you've done that so many times, so that's not new for you, but really, it's an awesome thing that you can do that. Let's talk about what happened to you on that first Vipassana experience. What happened?
Sure.
What did you become aware of?
I became aware of my pretty intense reaction to discomfort. Like, I would react so negatively, so full of aversion to any discomfort that I would feel. Um, and then that totally, goes alongside with what was happening to me before I did the Vipassana course, when I was building all these bad habits, because I just didn't want to, like, feel any difficult emotions. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to, like, you know, I didn't want to be with my own internal turbulence, but that's what caused so much of the problems, was that I was avoiding myself. So being able to see that, like, play out in the 10-day course, it was quite powerful because it helps me build a new relationship with all of these tough sensations in my body, so that I would just react less to them. And the other thing I really noticed was my my poor relationship with change, right? Like, change is such a fundamental aspect of our universe and of just life in general. And if we're able to embrace change a little more, we'll actually struggle less. And I think that was like just a big game changer. But the course was, you know, so incredibly difficult for me personally. It was such a struggle, but it was, the best struggle that I ever went through, because I still, I go back to this day. I do a few courses a year, and I just get so much from it. The taking steps forward, and the healing and the liberation continue.
Yeah, that is so clear and so well said. I feel like everybody can relate to that. Like I said before, you do a really good job of taking us on the journey with you. And I personally can relate. I remember my first meditation retreat. I felt this feeling. I can only explain it like sunburn all over my body. Like
Mm.
I couldn't be in my own skin. I was coming out
Mm-hmm.
of my skin, and I really couldn't believe how much anxiety was caused just sitting still.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more you have that experience, you really come to learn how to make space to love those parts of you that are just really resisting um, showing up in the moment. And so, take us through, what can we learn as we're, listening? Some of us haven't gone a few times a year on these
Hmm.
10-day
Hmm.
journeys. So, what might be some of those uncomfortable feelings? And what might be some of the ways to welcome them to the table and make space for them, and learn that we can actually sustain that and tolerate that,
And that's inside retreats or outside?
just from whatever
Just in
you've learned?
general?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I mean one of the key things, even before I started meditating, that really helped, I think in a lot of ways helped prepare me to be able to tolerate such a serious process, um, was challenging myself to sit with uncomfortable emotions. And I didn't have a solution. I didn't have a practice, just to be with whatever was arising in that moment. I felt like intuitively like that's what I needed to do, because I found that what had gotten me into such a difficult situation mentally was that constant pattern of avoidance, constantly running away, constantly seeking pleasure, constantly seeking distraction. Um, so like I thought, the answer is in the opposite of that, is like, let me just like feel this sadness. Let me just feel this anxiety, and learning to just be with it, I think actually took a lot of power away from those emotions, and actually created space for a lot of healing. So I think being with yourself, and that's like a tricky thing, right? Being with yourself, not in the sense of like fueling the emotions that you're having. It's like, no, 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 just be with it without feeding the fire, right? Like don't become the emotion, just watch it. um, I think that can make a huge difference in people's lives. um, and the other thing too is like, I'm glad that I ended up hearing about this technique in particular, because the Vipassana taught by SN Goenka, because it just like, it was what I needed. I think a lot of times when people go into personal growth, they try to reinvent the wheel, and they like want to like figure out like, what is it that I can do, or what is it that how can I set things up? But actually a lot of amazing things have already been developed, and you just need to go out there and find something that meets your conditioning where it's at, whether that's finding a really good therapist, like doing some journaling, or finding one type of meditation or another, something that suits you. I think just makes the whole process much more efficient. So like if anyone's hearing this, like, and you don't have a practice, go find one. There's so much out there.
There's so much out there.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I mean, think about where we were as a society 30 years ago. There weren't all
Oh
these
yeah.
apps. You can now find John Kabat-Zinn and Tara Brach
Mm-hmm.
and Sarah
Mm-hmm.
Blondin and you. And there's like whatever flavor of ice cream you like they have that equivalent for all kinds of practices to help you self-soothe and self-regulate. And John Kabat-Zinn has a great expression, which is, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf.
Yep. Yep.
And what you said about just being with it, but
Mm-hmm.
not fueling the fire. And I want
Yeah.
you to talk about that more, because I think that we really have an incredible capacity to be with what is.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're in the thoughts, we're actually still avoiding, right? The more you're in your thought, in your thought, in your thought, in your thought, and you're just like, that is fueling the fire. And that's not really sitting with what is. Sitting with what is allowing the feeling, right? Just that
Mm-hmm.
feeling of it. Is it grief? Is it sadness? Is it pain? Is it overwhelm? Is it joy? Is it shame? What's coming through?
Mm-hmm.
What we often do, and I perceive this in myself and other people, is just like the more of the story, the narrative, which I think is really hard to be with that, because it doesn't actually exist. It's just a story that just keeps getting worse and worse. But I don't know that people necessarily understand that. So sometimes when people say, just sit with it, they
Mm-hmm.
just go up in
Mm-hmm.
flames, because that they think that that's an opportunity to just literally sit down and allow their
and
mind.
stew in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really not about the mind. Can you explain what that looks like, what that feels like, so we maybe could get access to that?
Yeah, I think there's two components that kind of stand out. Like one is you're being with it as long as you're not letting it control your actions, right? And that actions includes like if you start sort of stewing in the narrative, like you were just mentioning, if you're just like, going wild with the stories, then yeah, you're just adding more anxiety to the anxiety. Um, and the other part of it is like at the intellectual level, right? Like everything's impermanent. So if you understand that this is an impermanent phenomenon, even if you're not like meditating or anything like that, you're just like, oh, right, like I feel pretty crappy right now, but this isn't going to last forever because I actually didn't feel crappy yesterday. So how long is this really going to last? Yeah, for a few hours, maybe a few days, but it changes just like everything else. Like there has never been in the history of the universe a storm that has lasted forever. So this one is not going to last forever. I think that understanding of impermanence alone, like literally peace itself is built on the embrace of impermanence. So the more deeply you can embrace it, the more you're going to be able to do that surfing that you were mentioning earlier, surfing the waves. But I think it's really, yeah, it's being with it without letting it control you, without letting it fully be with the narrative. And I think you can also be with it and have your attention on it without being like totally consumed by it. So it's about finding a middle path where you're like, okay, I feel this anxiety and this sadness, and I'm spending part of my attention sitting with it, but I'm also still moving through my day. I'm also still, taking care of the tasks I need to take care of. And maybe in this day, I'm moving a little more gently and being kinder to myself, and I'm decreasing the amount of things that I need to take care of, but I'm also still living. I think that can be quite helpful because like there is an important balance there, because you don't want to just like, I don't know, make things rougher for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is really so powerful to sit with that truth that this too shall pass, right? The
Mm-hmm.
happy moments pass,
Mm-hmm.
sad ones too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's critical to understand both, right? Like I think understanding that happy moments pass, like that one is clutch. If you really
Mm-hmm.
are able to embrace that truth, then not only is it going to make you more present for when good things are happening, you're going to be able to enjoy them in a much more selfless way so that you're not so attached and you're like, oh, I have to replicate this over and over and over again. It's like, no, it's here right now. Let me be here. And when it's gone, okay, it's gone, and I can, at the very least, be grateful that I was able to be present for the good things while they were here. Because there's a lot of people who, even though everything they were craving has appeared, they're still like their mind is already focused on what's missing. And that's tough. That's a hard way to live.
That is a hard way to live. That's for sure. In in the platform you've created, you have touched so many lives. I mean, it's really powerful. What is or what are some of the biggest repeating pain points for your readers, for your
Mm,
audience? What do you see as either the main thing or a couple of the main things that come up for people?
that's a great question. I think one thing that always kind of surprises me is that there's a pretty constant shift between things being pretty good and things going a little harder or like being a little more difficult for people. So that within every week, like whenever I post a story or a piece about sort of being with tough moments, handling tough moments, or even just recognizing that a tough moment is happening, a lot of people will send messages, just being so grateful that they're being seen through their tough moment. And that even if, and that tough moment can be happening like once a week or every 2 days, because that's life, right? Like we're constantly traversing the emotional spectrum, like just moving from joy to anxiety to jealousy or happiness, selflessness. We're constantly bouncing around, and that's normal. That's life. But I think that's always kind of been surprising, is this like this sense of being seen that people really deeply, um, you know, appreciate. And I think also the other thing that kind of stands out is that we're not so different from each other. Like similarly, like, right, then not only are we traveling through that same emotional spectrum, but we all have this I don't know, this like ups and downs by the way the week has been kind of designed by the capitalist world, where like Mondays we are excited, we're ready to try to build new patterns, we're ready to take on the week. Whereas like Wednesday, generally people may feel like a little kind of beat down by the week, because things have already happened that have not gone the way we wanted them to go. And then when you get closer to Friday, people are thinking about their loved ones or friends that they want to see or wish they could see if they weren't so busy. And finding those commonalities that, like, yes, we each have our own individual emotional history, but we're like going through pretty similar things, you know, in our minds. Like the cravings are similar, the difficulties are similar.
It's one of the most powerful things that we've ever had said on the show, what you just said a minute ago about people feeling seen because you are creating space for us to have a human experience, and why that is just so punctuated with exclamation points, and people are reflecting to you how much they appreciate that you're seeing that. And I say it's one of the most powerful things because there is an assumption in the world at large, the world that we see, the world that people let us see of their own life,
Yeah.
that life is supposed to be, it's supposed to be camera ready and worthy of an Instagram post. And if it's not, something's wrong. And I think that
Hmm.
is why people tend to uh, identify with, oh my God, what does that mean about me? And do I, is something broken? And it's like,
Hmm.
no, no, no. What you just said and the way you said it is, oh, because that's the way it is. We traverse, all these different
Hmm.
emotions. But how many people, whether you just bump into them at the grocery store or you're following them on Facebook, how many people are letting you in to their actual life, and how many people are very selective, and then therefore creating a culture
Yeah.
where it looks as though one thing is real and everything else is actually very problematic and dangerous, and you're alone in it,
Hmm.
and you're
Hmm.
saying, oh no, 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 this is actually the way it is for everybody.
Yeah, I think that hopefully building a new culture where we get to end the performance is like key, you know. And I see a lot of, you know, not just in the stuff that I'm putting out, but there's more of that in like my fellow Instagram writers who are just like pointing out the reality of life, you know, because it's hard. Like it's hard to be able to maneuver the ups and downs of life and to be able to even accept the fact that there are ups and downs, which sucks because society has told us the opposite, where a successful life is just up and up and up and up and up. But that's just not true. It's not realistic at all. But I think it's an exciting time where the I feel like the culture is getting shifted so that there's more space for not just trauma and the intensities of deep trauma, but just like not feeling good, right? Like it doesn't always have to be like this super serious situation where we have to call our community and our friends for support. It can just be like, okay, I don't feel that great today, and that's fine.
It's really beautiful. And you are doing such a service. You are doing that. What you just set out to do, you're doing it. And it's
Mm,
powerful. And there are a few other people, and I say only a few because in the sea of what is created content wise, it is just a
yeah.
few. But there are a few people courageously doing that. It makes me think of that movie. There's, again, only a few movies that have endings like that, but there's that movie Once from, like, when was it? 15 years ago. Glenn Hansard wrote the music, and it's about these, two musicians. And I mean, this movie's 15 years old, you guys, so spoiler alert, but they don't get together at the end, right? They
Mm,
have to go
mhm.
back to their complex lives.
Yeah.
And I love the ending because so many of our days end like that. So many
Mhm,
of our
mhm.
days end with having to hold something that isn't wrapped up in a bow, and how beautiful it is that we as people can make space to grieve and to um, just live this incredible human experience, which is, it's so painful and so enjoyable at the same time.
What you're saying is making me really think about how, you know, how we're constantly evaluating things. We're constantly being like, this is good, this is bad. But there's so much gray space that we're constantly trying to fight by giving it a valuation and being like, you know, okay, this is great, this is successful. But in reality, like even, you know, some pieces that I create, it's like I'll write things. And the point of everything that I write is hopefully people find it useful. Um, but then there are times where like, you know, I can't quite tell, like, is this really connecting with people? Is it not? And recently, what I've decided is like, okay, without letting the numbers tell me if it's good or not, right? Because everything has metrics. Um, just let it be what it is. If it's good, people will just, you know, it'll just go out and do its thing. If it's not good, that's fine. It's totally whatever. It's one post. One post doesn't make or break you. You know, like obviously, like over, if you're, you know, obviously over a long period of time, yeah, you want to have material that connects with people and that will like, you know, get you more visibility and all that good stuff. But my recent work personally and just like creating things has been like, just let it go, dude. Just like put out things that connect with
Wow.
you, that you feel is important. And let's not decide within 10 minutes, within an hour, if this has been successful or not, because you have no idea. Like let it ride out, let it do its thing. And even if at the end and you look back on and at the end of the week and you're like, oh right, that post didn't quite connect with people, to be able to accept that without stress and instead with curiosity, which is like, okay, if it didn't, but I still think the topic is important, how can I switch up the verbiage, the words, so that, you know, this theme that feels important to me, I can put it out there again in a different way and see, you know, how it can become a solid art that people can enjoy.
Yeah, that's good for you. I mean, that takes a
I
lot
mean,
of,
I'm trying though. I don't have it
yeah,
down yet, but yeah.
it takes a lot of courage for
Mhm.
all of us, but especially someone who's had the level of success that you've had. I just had Malcolm Gladwell on for a second time, and I said to him, I asked you this before, I'm going to ask you again. When you have a string of New York Times bestselling books, do you come up against the pressure of feeling like if this isn't a New York Times bestseller, then in some way it's a failure? And it's just interesting to hear because at your level where things have just been so um they have been so acknowledged and people are very clearly, you know, standing up in their seats for it. I think it can be even harder to get out of that loop of like, oh, now it has to do as well. It has to perform. And I love how you said before, end the performance. If we could end the performance, and you're showing your audience that. I want to ask you about your audience. I want to ask you now about this as it is
Sure.
a platform, because so many people listening to this show want to make an impact and want to be more fulfilled. And I'm curious for you, when did you decide like, I am going to put this out there for the public? And how did it go initially? Like, what was the journey? What do you think made it sort of take off and become this like very viral, potent community that you have now?
The primary thing is consistency, right? Because you can be like a great artist, but if you're not trying over and over again, then it just won't get out there. Because one thing that I noticed when like there were so many amazing writers in 2016 and 2017, people that I looked up to that just stopped. And if they had kept going, they would have larger audiences than I would have right now. And that kind of set a lot of people apart is like, are you willing, do you have the stamina to just keep going, even if you create a bunch of different you know, do different works that are just, they're okay, but they're not that great, because a lot of people want that sort of like meteoric rise to stardom, but that is just not going to happen. That's just not how it works. It's normally success is a slow build. And that's totally what I found in my own work. It's just like, let me write another piece. Let me like, you know, keep connecting with myself and try to process what I'm learning through writing. Um, but it's been quite the journey, kind of just being able to maintain my stamina so that I can keep going. And I think a lot of that is due to meditating, right? Like once I started meditating, I didn't stop going to retreats. I started meditating in my daily life. And that's helped me just kind of stay fresh because I feel like I'm constantly learning through meditating. I'm constantly studying impermanence. And that has so many, um, it adds so much to my perspective on different parts of life, for myself. And then hopefully that transmits through the writing that I'm doing. Um, but I feel like it's been a mixture of, yeah, consistency and also being willing to try new things, to try new themes, try new formats, like because you also want to find a mixture of, am I writing things that are actually important to me, and am I also writing things that can connect with an audience? Yeah, and finding the middle between the two is pretty critical.
Those are two really important pieces. One about the consistency and what you said about trying things, but also the piece you just said about your meditation practice.
Yeah.
Because I definitely in my own life feel that as well. I started my meditation journey in 2007
Nice.
and have had different, you know, I've gone to different teachers along the way, but you can feel it, right? That the resonance that
Yep.
you have is just it there is just more of a potency there. And so people tend to forget that and they think that the more you are busy and you use a hashtag or
Yeah.
you DM 15 people every hour or whatever the gimmick is, it's like there's something in the actually walking away from it and cultivating your own energetic, right? Really, really like what that looks like and how
Yeah.
that translates is so not what our society, what our culture tells you. It's the opposite. It's like, you know, to me it's very powerful and you just said it and linked those two together. I mean, how many people do you think who are reading books on success and habits and goal setting are walking away with the notion that spending time in stillness is going to move the needle? They're
Yeah.
not.
I'm glad that you're highlighting that because it's funny. So I was having a conversation with a friend who I'm working on a project with, and just like besides the project, she just asked me. She was like, how did things become so big for you? Like, how did the audience get so big? How'd you have these two books that are doing well?" And honestly, my immediate response to her was, I just kept meditating. Like that was it. That was, and I really trace it all back to that because and don't get me wrong, I do not meditate to be successful. I meditate to liberate myself from the craving that causes stress, that causes me to create more problems for myself. But in the act of doing that, in the act of relieving myself from craving, tension, and stress through meditation, um, the mind gets more creative. Whether you're a writer, whether you're a musician, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an engineer, an architect, doesn't matter what field you're in. When the mind is less burdened, it can see more. It can see more perspectives, and that helps. And it's interesting because I see it play out amongst all of my friends who meditate seriously because they all have such different jobs. But they go in, they do their 10 days, they come out and they're like, whoa, they're just like crushing it at work in a lot of different ways. And I hope people don't take it the wrong way where it's like, don't like meditate to be successful, meditate to build your peace, meditate to build your freedom. And from that, once you get that inner situation figured out, more goodness will be able to flow outward that emerges from within you.
I mean, what you just said should be something that's repeated, and everyone should go back and listen to the last 40 seconds of that every day for the next year and just see how different your year is. You said that. So, I mean, you are a poet. That was poetry. It was so perfect. And I want to talk a little bit more about it because there are people listening to us talk right now who have had that experience,
Yeah.
and they know where that lives in their alignment, in their body. They've memorized that feeling. And then there are some people listening to us talk, and it's like we're talking about chocolate and they just haven't had chocolate. So they're like, oh, it sounds interesting. Like it sounds delicious, but I don't really know, right? What that feels like when it sits on your tongue, what it feels like when you chew it. I don't really get what you're saying.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I was having this conversation the other day with a friend who's she's about to turn 40. And she said, I really want to go on an ayahuasca journey. And I've never done that, but I have a lot of friends who have.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I have nothing against you doing anything that you really want to do, as long as you don't hurt yourself or other
Right.
people.
Right.
But I said, I wish you would go on a week-long meditation retreat, because
Yeah.
I've been doing that. And she's like, no, 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 because there's something about this drug. And she's explaining to me. And I said, do you know that you can do that
Yeah.
without a drug? And she looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she goes, well, you don't know because you've never done those drugs. And I said, that's true, but I can tell you what you just said you're looking to get. You
Yeah.
can access that. You can access that, just you yourself and yourself. And then and so can you explain a little bit about your meditation process
Hmm.
and what you just said, releasing yourself from the craving and the addiction of that, right? Of craving.
Hmm.
Um, how can you explain a little bit more of the process so we can taste the chocolate more? Like, go a little bit deeper into what
Sure.
your process looks like and what you're getting beyond and what you're connecting to
Yeah.
when you drop in a
Yeah.
meditation.
So especially in this style of meditation, right? It originates from the Buddhist teaching. So it's understanding that there is this like underlying dissatisfaction in life where like our minds are in this pattern where not only are we constantly craving for more, but we're always noticing what's missing. We always are, feeling a little bit of aversion towards this and that, or a lot of aversion towards this and that. But there's this kind of constant battle that the mind is having with itself and with the external world and with its sensations. And really like really like being in this survival mode. But when you start tracing the source of that, which is either craving or ignorance, and you start sort of accepting the fact that, okay, that's there, but now let me connect with what's true. And one of the biggest truths, like what we've been mentioning through this conversation, is impermanence. And the style of meditating that I do, like it's really just a big study of impermanence that's happening within the framework of the body. You're just observing what's happening, what's there, and you learn more and more about how impermanence is just happening at every level, at the atomic level, the mental level, the physical level, the macro galactic level. It's happening everywhere constantly. And through this appreciation of impermanence, a lot of purification happens in the mind. Like one thing that we don't often realize is that with every reaction that happens in the mind, we're actually accumulating it in the subconscious. So that, let's say you're reacting with anger, then your pattern of anger is going to get stronger. You're reacting with sadness, your pattern of sadness just gets stronger and stronger, so that your perception is codifying all of this. And whenever a similar situation appears, it just reacts like, oh, right, I understand the situation. This is one where I react with sadness, and now more sadness comes out. So when you start observing yourself within the framework of the body, you are allowing for this unbinding process to occur where all of these knotted up habit patterns that you've created throughout the entirety of your life, they actually pretty powerfully just start kind of unloading, releasing, burning away rather quietly. And what you end up getting is a mind that is no longer as heavy. You come out of the 10 days and your mind just feels lighter, right? Like there, you may still have the same problems, right? The same situation or whatever, whatever challenges that you have in your life, but they just don't trigger you as much. They don't stress you out as much. And you actually, when you start looking at these old problems, because your mind has this new access to peace, this new access to creativity, you start looking at the situation in a new way, right? There's more answers available than there were before. And I think this is something I used to tell friends of mine, that I would laugh when I would go to retreats, because I would enter a retreat and I would have like all these problems that were on my mind, and I'd come out and I just have all these answers as to like, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with this is how I'm going to deal with that. And that, continues to happen, where it's like we create these narratives, these challenges in our minds, challenges that may very well be real, but sometimes we often make them harder than they actually need to be. And it's quite powerful, like the technique specifically, this Vipassana technique is for the purification of the mind, and for your ultimate liberation.
Yeah, it's really so key, isn't it? And people don't really get what you just said, that the more you practice sadness, you're going to get better at it.
Yeah.
The more you practice worry, you're going to get better at it. The more you practice anger, right? And it literally, we can see it on an fMRI too. We can see the brain developing more of these like branches in these neural pathways. And then we can also learn to prune these away, right? And it's unbelievable what we can do to free ourselves. And I want to talk, you have these two beautiful books, Inward and Clarity and Connection. One of the things you talk about in Inward, which one of the themes of your work, is self-love and unconditional love. And it's interesting. I want to hear what you have to say about it. And just to comment on what you said before, like, I think while there's so much impermanence, like you said, the thing that is forever and ever and always is love. It's, when somebody passes, it's what you're left with. You can feel the love that this person like left behind, right? And yet it's such an enigma, like unconditional love, accessing it, finding it for ourselves, knowing how to even receive it. So what is the resistance, do you think, about with that? And how can we open our palms to experience that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's so many different ways to even start conceiving of that subject, because everybody has their own emotional history. So, like, some people will struggle with receiving, other people will struggle with giving, and there's just all these different ways where our patterns can accumulate, so that they can make our journey into self-love quite difficult. But wherever it is that you're starting, I really like to just define self-love as doing what you need to do to heal yourself. And I do that to hopefully kind of set self-love aside from, it's not just about like buying yourself things. It's not just about like giving yourself whatever you want. Like self-love, I think real self-love is doing that hard work so that you can totally accept yourself. You can totally accept what's happened to you, your whole history. And that acceptance is going to allow a transformation that not only helps you become a better version of yourself, but will actually start opening the door to unconditional love for yourself and all beings. So I see that relationship of self-love and unconditional love. There's really a bridge between the two that starts with just you and where you're at, and helps you evolve into just having a greater capacity for love for everyone.
And that's so beautiful, because the number one thing that I see in my audience is this feeling of, there's such a lack of love for ourselves. And it's the thing that comes up, I would start my own podcast, but I don't think it's good enough, or that I'm that interesting, or, I would, maybe take the risk and say this thing to this person, but then they might leave. And so I won't, this feeling of being rejected. So rejecting ourselves ahead of time, because there is just like this inherent unworthiness of love, and love feels like it has to be earned, which then that's really not love. That's more like a business deal. And so it's really, it's fascinating just how fast people are just constantly running and juggling and trying to do all of the things, and just what a waste of energy it can be sometimes,
Yeah, I wanted to add to the point that you just said that's so important. Like, someone deciding not to do something or a project or starting a connection with someone because it might end. Now, can you imagine if we lived our lives according to that, that we won't do anything because we will only do things that last? That literally will sort of neutralize everyone right there. No one will be able to do anything.
Mhm.
And I think that's why digging deep into this understanding of impermanence, like, everything will eventually end. Everything like has its high moments, its low moments. So you shouldn't stop yourself from doing something great just because one day it'll be over. Like if you think about, whether it's like great writers or great athletes, like everyone has their time, right? They're like, especially people who are really successful, like they have their time period in the limelight, they have their time period of success, but then eventually it fades, right? You're not going to be like a world-class athlete or a world-class creator the entirety of your life. That's just not how it works. But you can have a moment where you do deeply impact people with your work, whether it's a small amount of people or a large amount of people. And that's something that I've been kind of training my mind, like, okay, today I have a very large audience, but will it always be like that? No, I don't think so. Like I see how there is this trend, you can do well for a while and then it kind of peters off, and maybe it'll last and it'll stay at to some degree, but then for a lot of people it just totally fades away. So I always try to create for this moment of where I'm at right now, and I am actively working on not attaching myself to like, okay, I'm always going to be a writer or I'm always going to write a New York Times bestseller. None of that stuff, like, because eventually, like if I think in that way where I'm deeply attached about how my work is going to play out, then I'm just setting myself up
Right.
for tons of present and future stress. So let me just kind of live with what's happening in this moment, not expect it to last forever, and we'll see how far it goes. Like one thing that I like saying all the time is something that my Vipassana teacher says is like, let's see how long it lasts, right? You don't know how long it's going to last, but in the act of just seeing how long it lasts, you understand this isn't going to last forever. But I think it's thinking like that is helping me not only, deal with what's happening a little more peacefully, but just like, I think it's giving me more freedom to create too.
It's so liberating to just call that out like you just did,
Yeah.
and almost to say,
I'm
when
just here. I'm
some,
just here for a little while.
yeah, or whatever the fear is,
Yeah.
how long it's going to last. Like, let's say we said to everyone listening right now who was struggling with some worry or some concern that someone won't like it or that the
Yeah.
success will go away. How about we say to that person, 100% it will.
Yeah.
Like, how about if we said to that person right now, people already don't like you. People won't like it. Guaranteed. It won't
Guaranteed.
last. It
Yep.
won't last. Guaranteed. This will happen. You're right. That person will get mad. You're right. You will fall on your face. You're right. The critic. And then you say it, right? And then you have this incredible liberation
Mm-hmm.
because all of those things are gonna happen. They're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna last. They won't like it. All right, that's all gonna exist, and you'll survive it, and you'll be fine. And it's not even what it's about. Like
Yep.
you doing it or not doing it can't be that you came in the world only to speak your truth if it lasted, only to
Mm-hmm.
love someone if they loved you back every single day of the rest of your, like, no, that's not what it's about.
No.
That's
Yeah.
not the goal. Like what, and when you start to think of it like that, you're like, oh yeah, that's true. So I can unhook myself from the need
Yeah.
for those things because they're irrelevant.
Yeah. I love that you said that. You're cracking me up because like people already don't like you. But
Right.
are you gonna stop that from helping people who potentially might get so much from whatever it is that you're planning on creating?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Right. That is correct. Like 100%. that is already true, that there are people who are like, Diego,
Mm-mm.
not my,
It's just not my thing, and
yeah,
that's fine. I think
Kathy
that's
Heller,
great.
she's got freckles and she's so bouncy. And I don't know if I
Yeah.
agree with her. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
look at him, look how he dressed. Like, it's like, great. I'm so glad
Yeah.
because then you're done. You're done trying to grasp for it. It already
Yeah.
happened. And
Yeah.
you're surviving it right now. You're surviving it right
Totally.
now.
Totally.
I,
Yeah.
I
And you can't give people's like also their perception of you, you cannot give it that much weight because you have to understand that everyone's perception, you included, is totally dependent on your emotional history and your present moment actions. So understand that everything that you're perceiving is through this giant filter of whatever's happened to you in your past and what you're feeling right now in this moment. So that means like, is objective perception happening? Absolutely not. It takes such deep, intentional, masterful training to observe something objectively.
100%.
And most of us are not there. Like
No.
99.999% are not there. So can you give that much weight to someone's perception? No.
Right. And I love that so much because people have, like you said, there's so much momentum for
Yeah.
whatever the story is they tell themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
then you just are evidence for what they've decided they believe or they don't believe. So some people are going to look at you and go, they're going to point you out to their cousin and say, I told you everyone born in Ecuador is amazing and poetic. See, there's the evidence of it. Right. And
Yeah.
someone else is going to turn and say something like completely different. This is
Mm-hmm.
the evidence that anyone who does Vipassana is
Yeah.
boring or whatever they're
Yeah.
going to say.
Yeah.
And same thing with me, so th- like my friend Susie says, the problem isn't that people don't like you or have a negative feeling. The problem is you thinking that they shouldn't, because it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with anything. And I say to my audience, like, you don't like people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do
Mm-hmm.
you like everybody? Do you like every kind of food? Do you like every language? Do you love every music that's been, because I don't. There's
No.
music that I
Right.
just don't like. There's a few people in my family who I would prefer to not see. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Yeah.
like we're allowed to feel this way, but no one is allowed to have their feelings. What's that about? You don't like everybody, you know?
It's so good. And one thing I wanted to add to that too is one thing I'm noticing is that people who have high degrees of self-love, people who have been working on cultivating that aspect of themselves where they're deeply accepting every part of themselves, they actually are going to be much more capable of being like, just recognizing, okay, that's something that I don't like without hating it, without being like dropping vitriol and just being super antagonistic towards it.
Right.
And I think that's like a beautiful thing to cultivate because everybody has preferences and that's totally fine. So you can listen to a song, come across a writer and be like, oh, yeah, that's just not for me. Great. But that is a sign of progress where you're like, that's not for me. And I don't need to even spend time hating it.
I love it. I love talking to you. It's so good. I was going to ask you actually, just because I love for people to feel represented by all different kinds of cultures, and
Sure.
you were born in Ecuador, and I was just going to ask you,
Mm-hmm.
what is your uh, because I've never been to Ecuador, so like in that culture, is
Mm-hmm.
this well received? Like, is this something that you can now look back and go, oh, actually, in the sort of fabric of how I was, raised, I can see now why I took to this? Or is it actually more of a sort of a hard left turn from the way your family system was thinking about life and all of that?
Yeah, definitely the hard left turn. I think like my people, like my country is receiving it well. Like the Ecuadorians that I come across are just so happy to be represented in some field or another because there's
Mm-hmm.
there's few of us. There's not that many Ecuadorians in the world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I did kind of just break away from the typical mold because I don't even know that many Ecuadorian writers myself, historical writers, people who've come from before. So I think it was, even when I started meditating, because I grew up, Roman Catholic, it was all rather new. But what was most important to my parents, and like I grew up like super poor, like it was hard growing up in the United States. My family, we were like really stuck in a poverty trap, basically up until my brother and I became older and got jobs. So that was, incredibly difficult to go through. And I actually connect a lot of my personal trauma to just being poor in America because it was so hard. Um,
Hmm.
but when my mom and dad, started seeing that I was going to meditation courses, they were never resistant because they could see that something good was happening. They could see that my behaviors were changing. I was
Mhm.
becoming much more gentle with my words, much more loving towards them, much more giving. And they were just like, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. We don't
Yeah,
get it,
it's
but just
whatever you're
keep
doing, it's
going.
working.
Yeah.
Don't stop.
Yeah, yeah. And now, they know so much more about it and are very open to it. So it's been good, them just, I think life has been hard for me and my family in a lot of different ways, but I think probably one of my like most fortunate things is my parents, because like yes, they were poor. Oh, sorry. Yes, they like weren't able to make a lot of money for our family, but they had really good morals, and I think that helped me a lot.
Mm. I'm just going to add this because um, my my journey at one point took me to Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm Jewish, and
Mm-hmm.
I, like you, started in more of a Buddhist tradition. Like in college, my first big awakening was meditation through more of a Buddhist practice, and then I wound up in Jerusalem, and I wanted to know why I felt so strongly in this land. Like, what was it about it that was like visceral? Like I was like
Mm-hmm.
crying all the time. I was like something was going on. And I met a rabbi who had been Buddhist, who had come back to his roots. And I learned that the first time the word for the Sabbath is used in the Old Testament is when
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is actually meditating. And the
Wow.
same word they use for the Sabbath, which is Shabbat, it's the Hebrew word for, Sabbath, right? And obviously Jesus, this is like his tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just so you know, and you might already know all of this, but the beginning and really the core, the essence of that tradition was seeped in meditation. And
Mm.
so the word for the Sabbath, the first time it's ever used is where Abraham is sitting and meditating at the foot of the tent in the heat of the day, and these three angels appear.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught me that we know the meaning of a word from the first time we see it used in the biblical sense. And
Wow.
so he said the idea for a Sabbath was supposed to be, and what it used to be, was a 24-hour meditation, a
Mm-hmm.
resting, a
Mm-hmm.
fully, but not resting, meaning the absence of doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
truly sitting in meditation, convening
Mm-hmm.
with that oneness, right? That alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the way, that's probably hard for people to do. So we replaced it with who knows what, all of the things. But that's the tradition of thousands of years of,
Wow.
so I
Yeah.
would, I would, I would assume that Jesus was a person who sat in meditation many, 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 many hours of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think one thing that especially like my mom is a huge, huge fan of Jesus Christ, like one of the biggest fans of Jesus.
She's the fan
And
of the faith. You say it like
um,
it's unique, and there's like, he's
I
got a
know,
few fans. He's got a few. He did well
tons,
for himself.
tons.
Yeah. He made a mark.
But one thing that she really, so like, I like, I go away to 20-30 day meditation courses,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'll be like gone. I'm gonna do a 45-day one in January. This will be my first time doing 45 days.
I can't. The most I can do is 7. I don't know how.
It gets even better as you
He's
keep
like, keep
going.
going, keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my mom really got it because of that story where like Jesus spends 40 days in the desert alone, like totally facing himself and like everything else, right? Grand story. But she sees like that value and that power of solitude to ignite evolution. And
I mean, it's like Moses
yeah,
on the mountain. It's like,
exactly. Yeah.
I wrote my senior paper about, I was a religion major, so I wrote it about Siddhartha and Moses, like, and they both grew up in a palace
Yeah. Yeah.
and they both left
Mm-hmm.
to go into the wilderness. And they both, Moses was a shepherd
Mm-hmm.
and the Buddha was a ascetic person.
Mm-hmm.
And then they both became leaders, but from the quiet, from the
Yep.
stillness, from leaving the material world. So what I'm saying is that we forget that the basis of the world's greatest philosophies and religions all
Yep.
point to the same thing, which is get quiet,
Yep.
get yourself some quiet, and God appears, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that
Mm-hmm.
oneness, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
intrinsic
Mm-hmm.
conscious, that's the place. That's the
Yeah.
place, right?
That's
So
powerful.
it's powerful. And it's so good to talk to you. Tell us where everybody can find you and follow you.
Sure. Now to the mundane things.
Yeah, the mundane.
We're like talking about all these high things. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I think, yeah, if you I mean, you could check out my two books. I wrote one called Inward, and I wrote a second one, Clarity and Connection. So you can find those wherever bookstores, whatever bookstore you have around you. And I'm also on Instagram at YUNG_PUEBLO, Young Pueblo. And I also have a newsletter, and I'm on Twitter and Facebook as well.
You're amazing. I want to have you back for like 10 more conversations. Everyone go follow him right now. Um, Everyone's already following him. It's like one of the biggest platforms. And it's so beautiful to see such a big platform when something is this good and beautiful. So go follow. And then if you like this episode, post and tag. You can tag both of us so that I can repost some of them. Thank you so much for being here. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you too. And I hope we do get to talk again because this was fantastic.